The substance of our discussion tonight is what happened at the Supreme Court. How was it covered? I have a panel here to help us with that discussion. But first, before we bring it local, let's take it international. And this is how the media has been reporting this for a while. Let me start with what happened a while ago. And this is what we're saying, that the New York Times ate its words. Here is what they said, that the Kenyan Supreme Court, this is their latest, the Kenyan Supreme Court courageous decision to nullify the re-election of President Uhuru Kenyatta is a critical first for Kenya and Africa, demonstrating that the democratic institutions are capable of acting independently and resolving disputes that in the past have often spilled over into violence. And the editorial board says, briefly, the Kenyan Supreme Court has done a major service to democracy and the rule of law and has provided needed lessons to international observers. That's one of them. The second one, they say, just from that, they say that critical first for Kenya and Africa, demonstrating that democratic institutions are capable of acting independently and resolving disputes. Well, long before that sort of retraction, because it is a retraction per se, this is what the New York Times reported. And the heading for their story then was "The Real Suspense in Kenya." All right, they say that Raila Odinga, a perennial loser, began crying foul long before the election commission declared that President Uhuru Kenyatta was re-elected with 54% of the votes to Mr. Odinga's 45%. This was part of the statement that led to that clarification. And obviously, when we did the election coverage, the local media was criticized by Patrick Gathara. He wrote an article in the Washington Post. He's going to talk to us. He spoke to this to Mark Masai. Briefly, he said, the media has, with the sole exception of the Star, which I assume is the Star newspaper, nevertheless been determined to avoid any mention of the tension and the protest, which are small but seem to be spreading. That was a publication in the Washington Post by Patrick Gathara. That's where we'll begin our conversation this evening. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. I'd like to introduce my panel tonight, beginning with Duncan Okatch. Duncan Okatch is a lawyer. There's so many legal issues involved. He'll be helping us with that. Followed by John Ngirachu. He's a writer right here, senior writer with the Daily Nation and an editor also. He also joins us tonight. Lorna Irungu is a PR and communication strategist. She also joins us. And finally, the man behind that article, that is Gathara Patrick. He's a writer and a political cartoonist. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming.
Thank you. All
right, a good point to begin. I'd like a brief comment from Duncan first on the presidential election. Is it a rerun? Is it a repeat? Just briefly, before we start discussing this.
It is actually not a rerun. It is a fresh election, and we have two instances where fresh elections are actually envisaged in the Constitution. That's Article 138(5) and 143. But the court was very clear in saying that the elections will be held under Article 143. The difference is very clear in that, and to me, I actually support the position of Ngirachu Okatch. If you read the Constitution the way it says that a fresh election under 143 means the election was nullified and anyone who took part in that election can actually take part in it. But again, you look quickly into the Supreme Court decision in 2013, which now tried to clarify fresh elections and told us fresh elections under Article 143, when there's a petitioner, will only involve those two individuals. That is the president, who they assume got the highest votes, and then the petitioner himself. So we are bound by that decision even as we speak now. And I believe IBC has followed that particular decision, and they are very right in following that decision, because that decision has been there since 2013. Ngirachu Okatch and co. had all the chance to go back to this particular Supreme Court, clarify that issue, because it will have affected them one way or another, but they didn't. So the hands of IBC are tied unless something is done differently.
Sadly, we only have a presidential election every 5 years. Sadly. Yes. So adjudicating this particular ruling was very difficult. So we understand, and I bet the Supreme Court will get something out of it, especially now that it's a constitutional interpretation that Okatch is seeking first, right?
That is true, but remember the Supreme Court, if they were departing from the interpretation of their predecessor Supreme Court, nothing would have been easier than them rendering that particular direction. But they never rendered. They just said Article 143, and they know there is a direction from their predecessor court on that. So it seems unfair from the reading of the Constitution, but at this point we say we are governed by the rule of law. I don't personally agree with that interpretation of the Supreme Court, just like our court, but we are bound by it unless it is set aside.
And the good thing, they're the ones who can change their mind. Thank you. Yes. Let's talk about the substance of our discussion. And I'll start with Ngirachu. Ngirachu, watching from the Supreme Court, from Parliament, or from the newsroom, how do you think the media performed in reporting the proceedings this time around, as opposed to 2013?
I think it's an unfair question, because I'm
that's why I start with you, Ngirachu.
I'm bound to say that we did a good job. It's not for me to, it's not for us actually in the media to scrutinize ourselves, but I think we did a fairly good job.
We did a good job. We did a fairly good job, Ngirachu.
Yeah.
Where do you stand?
I think a fairly good job.
Okay.
There are some aspects of the 2013 elections that we did not cover well, and which I think we did better at this time around. Because I remember I covered the 2013 election, and there were some gaps that, you know, when I looked at it later, when I thought about it later, I felt that we did not look into. But I think this time around we did a fairly better job. I know Gathara would disagree with that, but yeah, but it's a learning process. Fortunately, we have another election coming in a few days, in around 42 days.
So we're opening up the floodgates of
so we still have
from Gathara.
I mean, we still have another opportunity to cover another big election and see what we can do about it.
But listening to you, you're taking us back to the whole election process, right from campaigns to the Supreme Court and now this decision, and to the second one. I wanted you to confine yourself within the Supreme Court, because it was technical, it's very difficult, and walking the straight and strict line of sub judice, it was also difficult. But let me hear from Lorna.
So I have a huge problem with a couple of issues. I have a huge problem, one, with the fact that the Constitution of Kenya is still a document that is owned by the legal fraternity. It is not a document that is owned by the people. So when people mention Article 5, Article 143, Article this, it's gibberish.
You wonder what they're talking about.
To anyone who is not within the legal profession or not within a civil society group that works on the issue of constitution. So my biggest problem with the entire way this has been handled is then to be able to debate on issues. The media has then brought in more legal people to speak more legal jargon to an audience that doesn't already understand the legal jargon that's happening. So that for me has been a challenge. As we've said, we came out of 2013 with things that we knew that, okay, this could happen, right? Leading up to this election, every single analysis, polls, whatever was done showed a very close case. I think this was the opportunity for the media to start looking and saying, wait a minute, we could find ourselves back in 2013. What does this mean? What happened in 2013 that could be replicated here? If you ask the ordinary person out in the street, the only thing they remember from 2013 is amicus curiae. It was the word that caught people's attention. This election can be done, if you say a couple of words, Form 34B, and the litany of jargon that happened as the lawyers were talking about the submission.
So, in your mind, the media succeeded in confusing Kenyans the more?
I think the media failed in explaining and breaking down the issues in a way that the ordinary citizen would be able to engage and understand.
You know, sort of, I agree with you on one issue. If you ask any ordinary Kenyan right now, well, the US amendments, I plead the 5th Amendment, they're likely to tell you what that means. Yes. Ask them, what is Article 35 of the Constitution?
What is our role even as citizens? What is our rights as citizens? How do we engage with this? So part of the challenge that I feel the media should have taken up is not to side with the legal people, it's to actually break this down. Find people who can speak plain, very plain in how they explain the issues around it, and do this beforehand, because you had the opportunity. You needed to be ready. We're looking at the Supreme Court in shock and horror because, oh my goodness, they've gone where no one else has gone before. And unfortunately, they've gone ahead of the media. And they've gone ahead of a lot of other institutions. Unfortunately,
we start with Duncan for long on this, so the indictment is on us. We'll be talking about that. Let me hear what Patrick has to say from where you sit.
I think to an extent I agree with what Lorna has said. I think speaking specifically on the coverage of the petition, although I get back to what Duncan was saying in a bit, but confining myself simply to the petition, I think that there wasn't an articulation, if you will, of what the issues on which the petitioners were running were. I think to a large extent the media sort of let the lawyers do the talking in the courtroom, you know, and yes, they brought in a bunch of experts to speak, but I don't think they really narrowed it down and said it in plain language. These are the relevant issues. And I think it builds on a poor coverage, in essence, of the entire election. There wasn't an articulation of how the election, for example, should have been run. You know, what does the law actually say? And you don't need to simply tell guys, go look at the Elections Act, but what does it actually mean? You know, when the IEBC stands up in court and says that Okim's was just this thing so that you could see some nice pictures on TV or get some nice numbers on TV, that it wasn't central to the election, that's what they were saying. When they were saying they have discretion, they can choose whether or not to send things electronically or to take the paper forms. Yet the Act says clearly, presidential elections, transmit it electronically. That's what the Elections Act says. You know, and I think the media needed to explain this to people, so then they would know when they hear Abdul Nasir or whoever else is speaking, they would understand. They could contextualize it. But to get back to what Duncan was saying, I think it's not really true that the media did a good job this time.
That was Ngirachu.
Yeah,
Ngirachu, sorry. Yeah.
I think that the idea, I mean, that till today we don't have any media house that comes and tells you that at the constituency tallying centers, at the 290 of them, these were the results that were announced. You know, why did they all troop to Bomas? You know, and on this same show, we had Macharia Gathara who told me that they had 290, there are people at these 290 stations.
Where is our results? That's
Where
what you're
are
asking.
those results? Okay. You know, what was actually announced there? And if it wasn't announced, then that would have been a violation of law that they should be reporting. You know, so I think that the fact that we are kind of in limbo and we are simply tied down to sort of quoting.
But Gathara, to be fair, that is just one aspect of the election.
Yeah.
That is just one aspect.
We can talk about the coverage as you highlighted in my piece in the Washington Post about the coverage of the protests. I think the media was really complicit in the stealing of public money when it ran the ads from the PDU, Presidential Delivery Unit, which were clearly illegal. You know, clearly the Elections Act says the Election Offences Act says the government cannot or should not advertise its achievements.
Ngirachu will tell you that this is something that was supposed to come up for amendment, right? It was brought by the majority.
It doesn't matter, it's the law, isn't it?
Just hold on. There was an attempt to change that. But I'm surprised Gathara is saying that, because one of the things that was an issue at the Supreme Court was that the president had violated the law by doing all that advertising and all that. I think the Supreme Court has found there was no issue with the president on that. But we're still yet to get the ruling.
Yeah,
and, you know,
to
read it. So that is one issue I think you cannot really accuse us of taking illegal money.
I think I can.
I think he has.
Yes.
In the last couple of months.
Yes. I don't think you can do that yet until
before we see the ruling.
Before we see the ruling and the reasoning of the judges on that contentious matter. I'm surprised you'll be telling a media house not to take advertising money that looks clean to it. Hold on. And I think you're telling us with a very broad brush, because you're right when you say you're right when you say that we should have had our own results. I don't know. I'm not high up enough to know why you don't have our own results, because I am one of those who are deployed to Bomas.
Right.
But I think we did a fairly good job of breaking down the issues in the courts. And I remember I was part of the team covering that, and I used to keep telling my fellow writers, don't write about jurisprudence and all these things. tell us what the issues are. I want us to tell the Kenyans what the issues are. I wish you would be more specific on this is the point at which, you know, the Daily Nation or which I work for, or, you know, or any other media organization failed to touch on the Supreme Court coverage. Because when you now speak broadly, you know, it sounds like something you're saying for the sake of sound bites. I mean, you need to have.
I think I mentioned a few specifics.
All right, we'll go to the specifics. But before we come to you, let me talk to Dan. What do you think in terms of breaking it down? Did we confuse Kenyans even more with the terminologies? You know.
Mijungu, I think that was an unfair comment in terms of what happened, because I took part in that particular process, and I also observed many legal minds taking part in that process, and it was not only confined to legal minds, because I saw other professionals coming in and putting in their thought processes. The fact that Lorna will tell you that in 2013 it was an issue of amicus curiae. In 2017 we were talking about friends of the court, and people now understand better. So it's a graduating kind of process. But you must understand that in every profession, they have their language, and you must respect that. When you go to a doctor, there's a way they will actually pronounce a stethoscope and tell you that is a stethoscope. Telling them that to explain to you, they must actually go and try to define all that will be a time waster. Remember, even the proceedings themselves were caged in terms in time frame. Therefore, even the time to break it down was also caged, because by the time the proceedings have taken its toll on even the experts that were there, by the time the case is actually ending way past 11, obviously the time remaining is very little. Two, in between the sessions, there was very little time, but a lawyer will easily communicate in their language. The same way if you find a scientist, they will actually tell you that there's photosynthesis. You don't expect them to start breaking it down. But at the end of the day, at a point, they will start telling you this is what it does. And I can tell you, most Kenyans appreciate that process based on the experts that were there. You don't expect to bring a gardener to that particular show and say that the gardener breaks down what is proceeding in that court. It is actually an expert who is actually well versed with that process, who can break it down in an easier way. But again, just look at the words of our constitution. It starts with the preamble that we bequeath this constitution to ourselves. It is not lawyers bequeathing this constitution to ourselves, and you'll actually notice that Ekuru Aukot was part of the people who wrote that constitution, but he's going to the court for interpretation. And I can stand here and say, truly, he wrote it, he's right to an extent, but also there's a different version. So when Lorna says that it is a lawyer-dominated kind of process,
an expert-dominated, too many experts, yeah.
Yes, because there's no other way of doing it. But again, it is incumbent upon every person. It is incumbent upon every person to understand their constitution, and there's no class for that.
It's difficult. Let me tell you, we need to take a break. I know your mother was watching the proceedings at the Supreme Court. My mother was watching. So if I had a grandmother, they would be interested in watching. But a simple question before we take a break. If your mother sat before your television, our television sat there, do you think she understood everything we talk about, or your grandmother at home?
I tell you, she is an expert today because of what we did, and that's why we need to appreciate also. It's a moving process. We are not where we were in 2013. There are strides that are made,
and more interest probably. I'd like to pick this conversation
very quickly. Just one thing that Duncan said earlier about the issue of who can run or in the fresh election. I think it's important to note that in the Supreme Court judgment, what they in 2013 they said that the petitioner, if he is both a petitioner and he's a guy who got the second most votes. They didn't actually deal with a situation where the guy who got the third
and the fourth
most petitions, but the second one doesn't. So they didn't actually discuss.
They actually discussed that.
They actually discussed it. I think I have part of the ruling.
I've got it here, but I know the instant case that they actually mentioned was.
They actually say if the person who got the third or the fourth or even the fifth or even someone who didn't participate, if they actually petition, let's assume someone who participated petitions, it means that even the second, whoever was before him, will actually take part in it. That's why we always have, and I don't know Lorna will have an issue with that, but we have a phrase in law that says equity aids the vigilant. That means you must actually...
that's the problem, Lorna.
There you go.
Yeah, we need to take a break. We need to take a break, but as we take the break, let me read for you what you're referring to. It says, in a case where a petition challenging the presidential or the president-elect is filed by more than one candidate who had participated in the original election and the petition succeeded, the only candidates in the fresh election would be the petitioners, right? As well as the declared president-elect whose election has been announced. So they're allowed. On that point, we take a short break. When we come back, Lorna has to put you on the spot because it's your technical language. All right, we take a short break right here on Press Pass, but we still have a lot to talk about, including how the local and international newspapers or news outlets have reported this current onslaught on the judiciary by the executive. Stay with us.